Chag Sameach, everyone. Happy Passover, happy Pesach. Cantor Gurney and I are so excited to share with you this special Seder service, reading of the Haggadah, chanting of the blessings that you can use at home. So what's special about this particular video is that it's pre-recorded so that you can stop and start it anytime you want. If you want to stop to eat or stop to discuss or to refill your wine glasses, you have the option of stopping it and then continuing it. We're also going to be using a special text, the Haggadah, that is on our website. So I'll be announcing the pages, but the text will also be here on the screen, so you don't need the Haggadah if you don't have it. And so we're going to begin right now. The first thing we need to know is, what does our table look like? First of all, before I begin, I want to say Chag Sameach to Cantor Gurney.
Oh, thank you. And Chag Sameach to you, Susan, and to our whole Wilshire Boulevard Temple community. It's a strange time. We were strangers in a strange land. We're all in a strange land now, but nevertheless, we come into your homes for this year's Seder, and we're privileged to be able to do it, right?
Exactly.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome. So what do we need on our table? Well, of course, we need our Kiddush cup. So we need, because we're going to be drinking 4 cups of wine. So you need a Kiddush cup. And we need our candles, which I will bring out in a minute to light, because for every holiday, we begin with lighting candles. We need something to pour water. This is my special 2-handed water carafe, because we're going to be rinsing our hands twice, or you can go to the sink in your kitchen or any other room that has water, a bathroom or whatever, but I have my water at the table. We have a little bowl of salt water that we're going to be using for dipping into the salt water, which the salt water represents the tears we shed as slaves. And then, of course, we have our Seder plate, and I have prepared a Seder plate. Here's my Seder plate that I'm showing you on my table, and it has all the symbols of the Seder. It has the shank bone, which represents the Paschal lamb, the sacrifice, and also the lamb that's blood was smeared on the doorpost to save the Jewish people when the firstborn were killed. We have an egg that represents both fertility and spring, and one of the sacrifices in the temple. We have the maror, which is the bitter herbs that we eat to represent the bitterness of slavery. We have another kind of bitter herb that's called chazeret, which is usually romaine for more bitterness. We have the karpas, which is parsley or some green vegetable that we're going to be dipping into the salt water, and that also stands for spring. And finally, we have the charoset, which is usually a mixture of chopped apple and nuts, walnuts and cinnamon and wine, or many other combinations, representing the mortar of the bricks that the Israelite slaves used when they were forced to build all the buildings for the Egyptians. So we have this Seder plate on our table.
Susan, can I just ask you a question about your Seder plate?
Yes.
Because Seder plates they tell a lot of stories, right?
Yes.
Yes. And I wonder if you could share what's special about that particular Seder plate, because it looks like a beautiful silver Seder plate.
Well, to be honest, when I became a rabbi and got ordained, I bought this for myself, for my family, because I now conduct the family Seders, and I thought that I deserved a beautiful Seder plate. So it's my tradition, it's my heirloom that I'm starting to hand down to my daughter and to her children after me. So it's my own Seder plate that I bought when I became a rabbi.
I'll share you one of the ones that we have in our home.
Wow. And what is the story?
The story is, this one was created by Jillian Gurney in kindergarten at Browerman Elementary School. So of course it has special meaning, and we use it every year. I mean, there's also the opportunity to use as many different Seder plates as you want at your Seder table. You could have a Seder plate for every person sitting around the table, right?
Absolutely. And if you want, absolutely. And if you at your Seders want to stop now and pause and share the meaning of the Seder plate on your table, That would be something you could do right now. The final thing, and probably the most important, I'm leaning forward to get it, is of course the matzah. The matzah, the symbol of freedom, the bread of freedom. And I have a special matzah cover. And within it, we usually have 3 matzahs, one on top of the other, standing for the different kinds of Jews. The Kohen, the priestly caste, the Levites, and then the rest of us who are the Israelites. But many people put a 4th matzah in for those who are not free, a matzah of freedom and hope, a matzah of hope for the time when everyone will be free. This year we might put in a matzah of health, hoping that we'll all remain healthy. So a lot of people, and I do this, I add a 4th matzah to represent something that is important this year that I want us to focus on. So now that we have everything on our Seder, 2 more things, I'm sorry, I almost forgot. We have 2 special cups. These are very beautiful cups that I use very rarely. One for Miriam and one for Elijah. These represent 2 of our great spiritual leaders in our history. Elijah's cup is filled with wine because we believe that on Pesach, on Passover, Elijah will appear. We open the door in the hopes that he will appear and announce the coming of the Messiah, the coming of a time of peace for all of us. So that's 1 cup. The 2nd cup is for Miriam, and we fill it with water because Miriam, wherever Miriam went during the story of Passover and after, a well appeared, according to the Midrash, and she was the source of life, and there was always water flowing around Miriam from the time she put baby Moses into the Nile River to the mystical well, which we'll talk about later, that appeared in the desert wherever Miriam was. So we also have these 2 cups that we put in the middle of our table. So now we're ready to begin our Seder. And we're going to turn to page 2 in the Haggadah that you might have downloaded, to light the candles. So let me get the candles. They're right here. Just give me a moment.
And as you do that, Susan, I would like to share with everyone that just a few thoughts about the music for the Seder. Unlike many other festival occasions throughout the year that are celebrated in the synagogue, Pesach is the most important one that is celebrated in the home. Yes, there are important services for Pesach that take place in the synagogue, but the centerpiece is the Haggadah and the Seder in the home. And that has had an influence on the music that we sing for the Seder, because it's not done by, a well-trained cantor and choir musicians. It's for everybody to conduct in their own homes. And the music, therefore, for the Seder is relatively simple, and it's meant to be sung easily by anyone sitting around the table. So most of the melodies are simple. Many of them are folk melodies. There is one melody that you'll hear repeated throughout when we sing many of the blessings, and that is the one melody that is unique to not only Passover, but the other 2 of the major festivals, the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 festivals, Shavuot and Sukkot as well. And after you hear them 3 or 4 or 5 times during the Seder, I know that it will resonate with you. But generally the music for the Seder is homespun melodies.
Okay, so I'm now going to light the candles, the festival candles.
And the melody we sing here is this first version of the special melody for the festivals. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Yom Tov.
Amen. So we've lit the candles. We put them aside. Now, the word Haggadah comes from the word lahagid, which means to tell. And it's important for us to tell the story of Passover. But the name of our meal is a special name. It's called a Seder, as you know. A Seder means order, because we tell the story and do different symbolic acts with food and blessings and readings in a certain order. And if you turn to page 4, you can see that order. And the cantor has a very beautiful melody that he is now going to sing, the order of our Seder.
And why we sing this particular order is because it's a mnemonic device. It's a teaching device. Having a melody makes the order easy to memorize, right? So even if you didn't have the text in front of you, if you have the melody in your mind, you can recall the order. And it's believed that this particular melody is of Iraqi origin. So join with me. Kadesh urchas, karpas yachas, magid rachsa, motzi matzah, maror korech, shulchan orech, safon barech, halel nirtzah.
Thank you, Cantor. So as I said, we will be drinking 4 cups of wine. The first cup is the Kiddush, the Kiddush, which we begin all of our Shabbat and all of our festivals and holidays with. So now is the time, if you have not filled your wine glasses, to do so. And in some families, people stand. Some families, just the leader stands. And some families, you sit. Whatever your tradition, go right ahead and do it as the cantor chants the Kiddush.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'am, v'romemanu mikol hashon, v'kidshanu b'mitzvotav. V'atiten lanu Adonai Eloheinu b'yahava, moadim l'simcha, chagim uzmanim l'sason, et yom chag hamatzot hazeh, zeman chirutenu mikra kodesh, zecher yitziat Mitzrayim. Kivanu v'acharta, v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, u'moadei kodshecha, v'simcha u'sason, inchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh Yisrael, v'hazmanim. We add on the first night of Pesach, Shehachayim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu, v'kiyamanu, v'higi'anu, lazman hazeh.
L'chaim, everyone.
Fine.
So that is the first in the order of the Seder. The second is called orchatz, which is a washing of the hands without saying a blessing. So why do we wash our hands without saying a blessing? Well, another tradition on Pesach, on Passover, is to recline, to be sitting on pillows or cushions, because that's how free people sat, as opposed to slaves. And the Haggadah was really written during the Roman times. And if you know anything, if you've seen any Roman movies, you know that the Romans, they reclined on divans, on sofas, and slaves came around, or people came around, and they rinsed their hands to show, that they were beginning this big feast. And so we are like free people. We are going to rinse our hands. This is not before we eat, so there's not a blessing. So we would take our our carafe or go to the sink at this point, and we would pour water on our hands 3 times on each hand. So or somebody could be carrying a bowl around the table, and people will rinse their hands. Sometimes the children do that with a towel. So we're going to do, everybody do Matzah right now. Good. The next thing that comes after Matzah, if I turn the page, is karpas. This is the first thing that we're going to eat. And karpas is the parsley or the spring greens. So everybody is now going to take a piece of parsley or a green, whatever you have, and we're going to dip it into the salt water. Dip this into your salt water. Don't eat it yet. And we wait for the cantor to lead us in the blessing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri ha'adamah.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, whose presence fills the universe, who creates the fruit of the earth. Amen. And we all eat it. Delicious. The next part of the Seder is called Yachatz. So now you take your 3 matzahs or your 4 matzahs. Hold on, let me get mine. Oh my goodness. It's okay, we're good. That probably happens at every Seder. We take our 4 matzahs or 3 matzahs and we take out the middle one and we break it in half and take out just the half. We take out half of the matzah. Now, we're going to hide this matzah. We're going to wrap it in a napkin and hide it for later. But before we do that, we're going to say a beautiful, I would say, phrase or invitation to people to come in who have nowhere else to go on a Seder and invite them into our home. It is a tradition on Passover to invite people who have nowhere to go into their home. This year we can't do that physically, but I am basically going to be having a Zoom Seder with about 25 of my relatives all over the country. We're going to invite each other into our homes through the miracle of technology. And this phrase, halach ma'anya, this thing is not even in Hebrew. It's in Aramaic because that was the language of the day. And the rabbis wanted to make sure that anyone who was in earshot could hear this invitation. The other thing about this is, why do we only take half a matzah? And this was considered the bread of the poor. And when you're poor, you never eat a whole piece of food or a whole piece of bread. You always break some and break it in 2 and save half for later. So we could see it as something that poor people would eat, the slaves would eat. And also, as we know, the matzah is the food of slaves, because when our ancestors were rushing to be free, they had no time to let their bread rise, and this was the result, this matzah. So now on page 7 of the Haggadah, the cantor is going to chant the halachma in Aramaic, and then I'm going to read in English, and you can join me if you will. Cantor.
Thank you. And this melody was composed sometime in the 1970s by an Israeli composer. A lot of fun. Sing along. Halachma, halachma anya, di akalu abahatana, be'ara di Mitzrayim, be'ara di Mitzrayim, kol dikpin yete ve'yekol, kol ditzrich yete ve'yifsach, ha'ashatach, לשנה הבאה בארד ישראל השת לשנה הבאה בני חורים.
So we hold up this matzah and we say together, this is the bread of poverty and persecution, which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat. Let all who are in need come and share the Passover meal. This year we are here, next year in the land of Israel. This year we are slaves. Next year we will be free. So, and now whoever is hiding the Afikomen is going to wrap it up and hide it so the children can find it, and we will use that Afikomen later. So now is the time for a very popular section of the Haggadah, of the Seder, the 4 questions. The 4 important questions that usually the youngest child or the youngest person in your Zoom community would chant. This is on page 8. And so now, Cantor, why don't you lead us in the 4 questions?
I'd be happy to, and just a few bits of information about these melodies, and also really the intention, I think, of the entire Seder, which was the purpose of teaching, and in particular to teach children. And that meant that those who created the liturgy for the Haggadah, I think, were acutely aware that they had to keep the attention of children throughout the Seder. And of course, one device that they used was they introduced all the fun songs that we sing at the Seder at the end of the Seder. So the children had to wait to keep them interested throughout the beginning parts of the Seder, which they might have found perhaps not as interesting. All those tunes like Adirhu and Chad Gadya, they all come at the very end. So 2 approaches to the melodies for Manish Tanah. One is the one we're all familiar with today, which is, again, a contemporary Israeli melody, also composed probably sometime in the 1960s, believe it or not. But the tradition, long tradition before that, was that the Manish Tanah would be chanted in what's called by several different names: Talmud trope, Lernen trope, or Stuben trope, the melodies by which one would study and memorize passages of Talmud. And that would sound like this. Manish Tanah halayla mikol halelot, shebechol halelot anu ochlim chametz umatzah, halayla hazeh kulo matzah. That's how everyone, at least in the Ashkenazic world, chanted these 4 questions until sometime in the 1960s in Israel and in America. So now the familiar tune we all know, and let's sing all the way through. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, mikol halelot, shebechol halelot anu ochlim chametz umatzah, chametz umatzah, halayla hazeh, kulo matzah, halayla hazeh, kulo matzah, shebechol halelot anu ochlim she'ar yerakot, she'ar yerakot, halayla hazeh, maror, maror, halayla hazeh, maror, maror, shebechol halelot ein anu matpilim afilu pa'am echad, afilu pa'am echad, halayla hazeh, shetef amim, halayla hazeh, shetef amim, shebechol halelot anu ochlim ben yoshvin uvein mesubin, ben yoshvin uvein mesubin, halayla hazeh, kulanu mesubin, halayla hazeh, kulanu mesubin.
Thank you, Cantor. So now we're going to read these in English, and we're going to answer these questions. Why is this night of Passover different from all other nights? On all other nights, we eat either leavened or unleavened bread. Why on this night only matzah? So what is the answer? Because, as you know, our ancestors were in such a rush to leave Egypt, they didn't even have time for their bread to rise, and so their flour baked in the sun, and the matzah cracker was the result. So this is considered the bread of the poor and the bread of freedom. On all other nights, we eat vegetables of all kinds. Why on this night, bitter herbs? Why do we eat bitter herbs? To remind us of the bitterness of slavery. On all other nights, we do not dip vegetables even once. Why do we dip twice tonight? Once we dip into salt water to remember the tears we shed, and once we dip into the charoset to mix the bitter and the sweet and to remind us of the mortar and bricks that the slaves built, but also there's a sweetness there, the sweetness of freedom and the bitterness of slavery combined. On all other nights, everyone sits up straight at the table. Why on this night do we recline? We recline, we lean back, we have pillows. Some people sit on sofas, on divans, because we are free. We are not slaves. We don't sit on benches or stools. We have the ability to be free. And so these are the answers. Now we turn to page 9. And there's a more formal answer in the Haggadah. We were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand. Had not the Holy One liberated our people from Egypt, then we, our children, and our children's children would still be enslaved. Even if we were all wise and learned, sage and knowledgeable, it is incumbent upon us to tell the story of our leaving Egypt, and those who enhance the telling surely are to be praised, which means you can have discussions, you can add. And here are a couple questions that you might think about. What in your life enslaves you? Where do you find freedom and release, especially now when we're sort of trapped in our homes? How do we find freedom and release? That might be a great conversation around the table. And what image of yourself do you wish to be free from? And what would you be like if you could change that image and have the courage to change yourself? So these are the different kinds of enslavement that we might think about today. There's also a really popular song, Avadim Hayinu, We Were Slaves, that on page 9, that the Cantor is now going to sing for us.
Avadim Hayinu, Hayinu. Ata bene chorin, avadim hayinu. Ata bene chorin, avadim hayinu. Ata bene chorin, Ata bene chorin, bene chorin.
So this whole section of the Haggadah is called Magid, when we're telling the story. And we haven't quite gotten to the telling yet, but we're sort of setting up the background and the understanding to tell the story. And at this point, the Haggadah talks about 4 kinds of children. I like to think there are 4 kinds of Jews, not just children, that are represented by these 4 archetypes. The first one is called the wise child, or the wise one. And why is this person wise? Man or woman, child, girl or boy, anything? Because they say, what does this mean for us? What happened to us? What do all these traditions mean for us? And so this person is wise enough to identify and participate in the Jewish community, in the Jewish people. And this person wants to learn more and more, gain more knowledge. So that's one kind of Jew. Those are the Jews in our temple who take classes, come to services. That's one kind of Jew who is very engaged. Then the next one they call the wicked child, and I totally reject that label. I call it the rebellious child, the rebellious one. This person says, this has nothing to do with me. What happened to you? I'm disengaged. So this person has obviously been turned off. Maybe they had a bad experience when they were younger. And I believe that you invite them to your Seder. You include them in your experiences in any way you can. The Haggadah says that you reject them, but I disagree. That is not why most people are rebellious. It's because they've been hurt, or misunderstood. And so it is our obligation to understand them and meet them where they are. Maybe invite them to a Shabbat dinner, maybe invite them to a Rosh Hashanah dinner, some way to begin to help them re-enter into the community. The third is the simple child who says, what is this all about? Now, these are people who don't know much about Judaism, but they're intrigued. Wow, I see you're eating matzah, you're having the Seder, I see you dip apples in honey, you go to synagogue. Well, tell me more. I want to know more. It's interesting to me. And so with them, you also engage them, explain to them, include them, and help them re-enter the community. And finally, they say this is the simple child, the fourth child, who says, doesn't even know how to ask the question. And these are people who, they know they're Jewish, but they really, a lot of them were never raised Jewish. They don't know anything about it. They feel awkward. And so to them also, you invite and engage and say, would you like to come over for dinner? Would you like to come to a service? Even if they're not asking. Sometimes people are too embarrassed or too shy to ask, but they really would like to be included. We have people in our community, actually, it was very interesting, who finally converted to Judaism. They had been coming for a while to the temple, and they went to our Choosing Judaism class, and we said, really, why did you never convert before? No one asked me. No one invited me. So sometimes you need to make the first gesture. So these are the four kinds of Jews, and all of them are welcome at our table. Excuse me. So now, return to page 11. And it is very important for us to remember that there's a covenant between us and God, and he saved us from the Egyptians, and in every generation we believe God will be there for us. And so we sing this special song on page 11, Vihi Sha'amda, that the cantor will sing now.
Again, this is an old Ashkenazic folk tune. We'll join together. Vihi she'amda, la'avoteinu v'lanu. Vihi she'amda, la'avoteinu v'lanu. She'lo echad bilvad, amad aleinu lechalotenu. She'lo echad bilvad, amad aleinu lechalotenu. Ela שבכל דור עומדים עלינו לכלותנו, עומדים עלינו לכלותנו. הקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו מידם, ברוך הוא מצילנו מידם.
So now it's time to actually tell the story of Passover. Now, you might want to do this around the table yourselves. Stop this tape right now and tell it yourselves, or you can listen to me tell it. But if we don't tell the story, we haven't really had a Seder. So first of all, we know that the Israelites were slaves in the land of Egypt. How did they get to the land of Egypt? They were in the land of Canaan, the promised land. Well, we remember that Joseph, the son of Jacob, who had the many-colored coat, if you recall, he made his brothers very jealous, and they sold him into slavery, and he became a slave himself in Egypt. And during that time, Joseph had a very great talent from the time he was a young boy of interpreting dreams. And eventually, after getting in a lot of trouble, trying not to, Joseph was thrown into prison, where he brilliantly interpreted two dreams, one of the king's chef and one of the king's butler. At the Pharaoh, I should say, not the king, the Pharaoh. And a few years later, the Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret. The dream being that he saw 7 fat cows swallow 7 skinny cows, and they didn't get any fatter. And another dream where 7 thin and dried out sheaves of corn devoured 7 fat sheaves of corn. And no one could interpret this dream. And then the butler remembered Joseph, this Hebrew slave in the dungeon, and they brought him up. And Joseph explained that this meant that there would be a terrible famine. First, there would be 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of famine so bad that they wouldn't even remember the years of plenty. And he advised Pharaoh to store all the grain during the 7 years to sell and give out during the 7 bad years. And during those 7 bad years, who came to buy grain but Joseph's brothers? And he recognized them, and after giving them a test to see that they had, changed and repented, they reconciled, and he brought the whole family to live in Egypt. So they all lived in Egypt, and their children and their children's children, and years passed, but then a new Pharaoh arose, and he completely forgot about Joseph, and he found the Hebrews to be a threat. He thought they were too powerful, they were too many, and he said they could overthrow us, and so he turned them into slaves. So that's how the Egyptians became slaves. But he wasn't satisfied with that. The Hebrews still continued to have children and remain strong, and he said, no, I'm too threatened. So he issued a decree that all the baby boys should be thrown into the Nile River. We know the story. And one mother named Yocheved had a baby boy that the Torah says, beautiful, beautiful child. And she hid him for 3 months, and then she couldn't hide him anymore. And she put him in this basket, and she sent the basket down the Nile River. Pharaoh's daughter found the basket and said, I'm going to save this child. I'm going to adopt this child and raise it as my own. Miriam went up to Pharaoh's daughter because she was very smart, even as a little girl. She probably was 7 or 8 years old. And she said, would you like a wet nurse or someone to take care of that baby for a few years? I know a wonderful woman who would be happy to do it. And Pharaoh's daughter said, yes, that would be great. And who was that woman? No other than Moses's mother, Yocheved. And so Yocheved got to keep her baby boy until he was weaned, probably around 2 or 3 years old, where he went to the palace. Now, there's a famous midrash that the sorcerers of Pharaoh and the wizard said, this child is a threat to you and you should kill him. And of course, Pharaoh's daughter said, you can't kill an innocent baby. And so they put Moses to a test. They put in front of baby Moses a bowl of jewels, glittering jewels, and a bowl of burning coals. And they said, if this child reaches for the jewels, we know that he's after Pharaoh's crown and he should be killed. But if he reaches for the coals, he can live. And so the baby, of course, was going to reach for the jewels, but the Midrash says that an angel came down and moved Moses' hand, so he touched the burning coals, burned his fingers, put it in his mouth, and burned his tongue. And we know that Moses had some kind of a speech impediment. We don't know if it was a lisp, we don't know if it was a stutter, but he had something that he couldn't speak properly. And the rabbis explain it by this Midrash. He burned his tongue, so he was never a great speaker. So he grew up in the palace, and he always knew that he was a Hebrew. And when he was a young man, he saw a taskmaster beating an Israelite slave. And he tried to stop him, and they got into a fight, and Moses ended up killing the Egyptian taskmaster, and he buried his body. The next day, Moses saw 2 Israelites fighting. He said, you shouldn't be fighting your brothers. And they said, what are you going to do to us? Kill us like you did the Egyptian? And so Moses knew that the word was out, that he was going to be arrested. And so he escaped. He ran away to the land of Midian. When he was there, he went directly to the well, which was the center place, which I call the J-date of the ancient world, where boys and girls and young people would always meet. And he actually met 7 sisters and ended up marrying the oldest sister, Zipporah, and going to work as a shepherd for her father, his father-in-law. Well, years passed, and then Moses had a mystical experience. He was out in the pastures with his flock when he saw something amazing, this bramble bush that was burning and burning and not being consumed. And a voice came out and said, Moses, Moses, take off your shoes. You're in a holy place. Moses was totally shocked and mystified. And he said, who are you? And this voice said, I am that I am. I am the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I'm telling you to go to Egypt and liberate my people. Tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And that is where the famous Negro spiritual came from. Go down, Moses, let my people go, which the Cantor, it's on page 11 and 12, is going to sing.
When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Thus saith the Lord, bold Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll strike your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. The Lord told Moses what to do. Let my people go. To lead the children of Israel through. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. When they had reached the other shore, let my people go. They sang a song of triumph for, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go.
Thank you, Cantor. So as we know, Pharaoh did not let the Jewish people go, and so God brought upon them 10 plagues, 10 terrible plagues that really the people suffered because their leader was stubborn and greedy. And we take our cup of wine now, we refill it, and because a full cup of wine denotes happiness, complete happiness, we diminish our cup. With each naming of a plague, we take our finger and we take some of the wine and we throw it onto our plate. We diminish our cup. We're 10 drops of wine. So now the Cantor will say the name of the plague in Hebrew, and I will say in English as we take out drops of wine for each plague.
And I think, Susan, that after you say the English name, let's give them a chance to sing back the melody so they can actually participate in the singing. Yeah?
Okay.
Let's try that.
Okay.
Dam.
Blood.
Svardeya.
Frogs.
Kinim.
Lice.
Arod.
Wild beasts.
Dever.
Cattle plague.
Shechin.
Boils.
Barad.
Hail.
Arbe.
Locusts.
Kosher.
Darkness.
Makabicholo.
Slaying of the firstborn. Okay. So after that, as we know, Pharaoh, after the slaying of the firstborn, Pharaoh said, okay, you can go, leave now. And the Israelites hurried up to leave. And of course, that is when they had no time for their bread to rise. And that is when the matzah was formed. But when they got to the Red Sea, to the Sea of Reeds, as it's called today, they were trapped because Pharaoh had changed his mind and said, no, I want them back, bring them back. And he sent his soldiers and chariots out after them. So the Israelites were trapped between the sea and Pharaoh's army. And God said to Moses, lift up your hand with your staff and I will split the sea. But according to the Midrash, the sea did not split immediately. In fact, nothing happened and the people were terrified and paralyzed. And then one man named Nachshon walked down to the water's edge and started to enter the water. And he walked up to his ankles, his knees, his waist. Nothing happened. He went up to his neck and suddenly the sea parted and the Israelites were able to cross, teaching us that when we expect God's miracles, we need to be a partner with God. We need to do our part. Things are not just going to happen for us. We have to make our own effort and have our own actions. When they crossed the sea, as we know, Pharaoh's army went in right after them, and the sea closed on them. And the Israelites were safe on the other side, where they sang for the first time the Michamocha prayer that we sing every single day in our services. And out of this experience came this very popular song in our Passover Haggadah, Dayenu. It would have been enough. Dayenu means it would have been enough if God had just given us the 10 plagues, if God had just split the sea, but God then gave us Shabbat and he gave us the Torah and he gave us Israel. Every point we say, thank you, God, it would have been enough. But more and more abundance and more blessings came from God. And so now we sing Dayenu, it would have been enough, on page 13.
Ilu ilu hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, hotzianu mi Mitzrayim dayenu. Dayenu, 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 dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et ha-Shabbat, natan lanu et ha-Shabbat, dayenu, 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 dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et ha-Torah, natan lanu et ha-Torah, dayenu, 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 dayenu.
We continue on page 13 if you have the Haggadah. How could so many people leave a place at one time? Amazingly, in our own day, we know that refugees all over the world seek shelter and comfort. When our ancestors left Egypt, they were pursued by Pharaoh, his horsemen, and chariots. They found themselves trapped between the Egyptians and the sea. At times, each one of us becomes a refugee, perhaps not politically, but emotionally. We flee pain and darkness that threaten us. We stand before the sea, pursued by fears, either imagined or real. Right now, we are refugees from the coronavirus. We are frightened and we are trying to be safe. Then the Midrash reminds us of the story I told you of the man Nachshon, who displayed his commitment to freedom by walking into the sea. His act of faith and courage opened the way from Egypt to freedom, and he enabled all of us to be reborn into freedom. So this word Egypt actually means more than just the country Egypt. The word in Hebrew for Egypt is Mitzrayim, which means the straits or the narrows. The geographical Mitzrayim is a pinched green strip of land in the midst of desert along the shores of the Nile River. The metaphorical Mitzrayim can be any restriction, physical or spiritual. We are all in Mitzrayim right now because of the quarantine, because of the ban. We're all limited. We're all limited. We have all come through tight passages, splitting the waters of the Red Sea to search for a way, sometimes struggling for a long time. As with Nachshon, we too can achieve our salvation through our willingness to take risks. So right now in our Mitzrayim and our narrow straits, how can we split the waters of the Red Sea? How can we come through this together? This is something we might want to discuss around the table. How are we going to be strong and resolute and brave and have courage to go through these narrow times and know that once we cross to the other side, we have to believe that we will be free. We will have a time to rejoice and sing together. So now we're going to move to what's called Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. The great scholar, Rabbi Gamliel, said that you have to talk about three things during the Seder or you're not really celebrating Passover. Pesach, which is the Paschal lamb, which the shank bone represents, Matzah, and Maror. The Pesach, which our ancestors ate when the Second Temple stood, what is the reason for it? They ate the Pesach because God, the Holy One, passed over the houses of our ancestors in Egypt. So that is why we talk about Pesach. Pesach means passed over, Passover, literally, the angel of death passed over and spared us. Matzah, what does it symbolize in the Seder? This is something you can answer yourselves. There was insufficient time for the dough of our ancestors to rise, and so they rushed out to be free, and that the result was the matzah. And then why do we eat maror? Because we remember the bitterness, as I've said before, of our time as slaves in Mitzrayim. So these are the three things that we must discuss. And also the last thing we must know, in every generation, we must see ourselves as personally being enslaved and personally liberated. It not just didn't happen to them, it happened to us. And right now, it would be so great to be liberated, and we will be liberated. And in every generation, there was a time for the Jewish people when they did feel enslaved, they did feel oppressed, and they came through it. And we can be as resolute, as strong as our ancestors, as our Holocaust survivors, as our survivors of the pogroms, of the Spanish Inquisition. We will get through this together. And so the Cantor is now going to sing Bechol Dor V'Dor on page 15.
בכל דור ודור חייב אדם לראות את עצמו כאילו יצא ממצרים.
Thank you. And now it's time for our second cup of wine. So everybody refill your cup for the second blessing over the wine, and let's dedicate this to our families and friends. This cup of wine is for our family and friends who we love, who are seeing us through this, who we are connecting with either virtually or literally. We dedicate this cup of wine to them. Cantor.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam orei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Amen.
We drink our wine. So now we're almost going to eat. So now we literally wash our hands for the blessing. So again, we would take our water or go into the kitchen and wash our hands. And during that time, we would say the following blessing. Cantor.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim.
Praised are you, Adonai, our God, whose presence fills the universe, who sanctified us with mitzvot and commanded us for the washing of our hands. So now, everybody takes a piece of matzah. And we're going to say two blessings. So don't eat after the first one. One is the blessing of the motzi, and the second one is a special blessing for eating matzah. If you have this Haggadah, it's on page 17. This is motzi matzah. Cantor.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav וציוונו על אכילת מצה.
And we eat a piece of matzah. Good. Now we go to maror. So you take your horseradish, your bitter herbs, and let's see, some people put it with haroset, some don't. I say we don't. So you take a little horseradish, bitter, put it on a piece of matzah. Everybody ready? Cantor?
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו על אכילת מרור.
Amen. Bitter. Now we make a Hillel sandwich. We take 2 pieces of matzah. We take some maror and haroset and put it together in a sandwich. So we mix it together. It's called a Hillel sandwich, haroset and maror. And there's no blessing, but this way of eating matzah, maror, and haroset reminds us of how Hillel would do so when the second temple still existed, making a sandwich of the Paschal lamb, matzah, and maror. Because it said, with matzah and maror, they shall eat the Paschal lamb. So now everybody eats the Hillel sandwich. And now it's time for the meal. So you would, at this point, pause the Seder and enjoy your meal.
You enjoy
Now
your meal
we're
too,
back.
now.
What?
You enjoy your meal as well.
Yeah, thank you, you too. So now we're back after our meal. And it's time for the dessert or the Afikomen. So the kids, if they haven't found the Afikomen, now's the time to run around and find the Afikomen. And you're supposed to just eat it. There's no blessing or anything. Eat the piece of matzah. It's not very sweet, so I hope you had a lot of dessert before you got to this, because this is not the best dessert. But that's it. You stop, don't eat any more until the end of the Seder. Then I'm sure people will eat again. And so that was called safun. The next part of the Seder is called varech, and it's the blessing after the meals. It's the thanking God for the food, and the cantor is just going to do one section of it. Hazan et hakol. So cantor, this is on page 20. Just the final blessing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam azan et haolam kulo b'tuvo v'chein b'chesed u'brachamim u'noten lechem lechol basar ki leolam chasdo u'tuvo gadol תמיד לא חסר לנו ואל יחסר לנו מזון לעולם ועד בעבור שמו גדול כי הוא עזר ופרנס להכל ומיטיב להכל ומכין מזון לכל בריאותיו אשר ברא ברוך אתה אדוני האזן את הכל.
And in this prayer, what we are saying is God's surpassing goodness fills all time and space. And God, there is sustenance for all. None need ever lack, nor ever be without food. Thank you, God, for sustaining all creatures. And so now we continue on page 22 with the third cup of wine. So let's fill our cups again. And let's dedicate this cup of wine to our teachers, our rabbis, our leaders, people who are enriching our lives, deepening our lives at this difficult time. So this cup is dedicated to our teachers and leaders. Cantor?
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri yadafen.
Amen. Now we come to the time where we are going to focus on our Elijah's cup and our Miriam's cup. As I said before, Elijah, we open our doors now. So you can stand up, everybody, and stand around your table. Somebody go and open the front door. And maybe you'll put your arms around each other. And we're hoping that Elijah will come into one of our homes, sip from our cup of wine, and announce the coming of the Messianic age of the Messiah, of a time of peace. Let's say a time of health, a time when the plague of the coronavirus, we could have added that as our 11th plague this year, is gone. And we're at the same time, we're going to remember Miriam. So Miriam, as I said, is always connected to water. Miriam was the midwife of our liberation. She wanted to sustain us always as we come to grips with our tasks and responsibilities. The sages talk about Miriam's well. Wherever she was in the desert, a beautiful well opened up and she gave water and life to the Jewish people. So this is the well of our ancestors of the world, of all of our Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And we hope that with Miriam's inspiration and Elijah's announcement, that we will come into a time of peace and health for all of us. So we're going to stand up and we're going to sing Eliyahu Hanavi, which is on page, it's on page 22.
Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hakiladi, Imera Yavenu, Yavo Elenu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Adiradi.
So we all sit down now and we drink our fourth cup of wine, our last cup of wine, and let's dedicate this wine to our doctors and nurses and healthcare providers and supporters, because without them and the scientists who are trying so hard to come up with a vaccine for this virus, we drink to them because they are sustaining and saving lives every day. The fourth cup of wine.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
Amen. Finally, we're at Nirtzah, the conclusion. We come to the close of our Seder service. Once again, we have recited the age-old epic of our liberation from slavery. We have chanted our praise for the redemption of Israel and all humanity. We have learned the message of the Exodus for our day. And we have rededicated ourselves to the cause of humanity's freedom from tyranny and oppression. Each year we conclude stating that we have conducted our Seder with the appropriate intention. Each year we repeat the same phrase and seem to return to the same place from where we began. We have a new question to ask. For what do we wait? What is our task tomorrow? How do we proceed? So we think about how we're going to proceed in the next months together as a community, as a family, as friends, supporting each other, loving each other, and coming through this together. And so as we celebrated this year, may we celebrate again next year at the temple and in each other's homes. Enjoy in a world that has improved and become healthy again. And may there be peace for all of us as we conclude with Oseh Shalom.
Oseh Shalom Imroma, Uyaseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'imru Imru Amen. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach.